Welcome to this episode of Turning Grief into Growth, the Journey of Transformation. This is a podcast that's hosted by Greg Jacobs and Don Lipstein. Well, good day, Don. How are you doing today?
I just got done a walk and good day to you too, Greg. But um, I just got done a walk in I think the temperature was about 27, 28 degrees, which is really cold for where I am. I can't imagine what you're dealing with up there.
I don't really want to hear the heat wave of 28 degrees. I think it was zero last night here in Kentucky with a wind chill of like negative 10. So we had about 6 inches of snow dropped on us, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there was a bunch of sleet and that snow just hardened so hard. My wife and my daughter and I went and took the dogs for a walk yesterday, and my daughter decides to walk on the side of the road. And granted, she's a grown adult for those listening, and she was walking on top of the snow. She wasn't even sinking in. That's kind of how it froze. So, yeah, I have no desire
I,
to go outside right now.
I remember those days. I used to live up north,
Yes.
and boy, and that's why we're down here.
Yes.
But I feel like so the sun is shining right now. I think we're going to get up into the uh, high 30s or 40s. It's chilly for here,
Nice.
um, but not anything like what you're dealing with, and the Northeast for sure.
I was supposed to go to San Diego this week and I canceled my trip, even though it was going to be a high of 66 out there. And I thought, man, that'd be really nice. But didn't really want to deal with the ice getting to the airport and all of the delays and cancellations at the airport. So it's okay. We muscle through it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited about this episode, mainly because you and I have had guests on for the last several, and we haven't had a chance to really just powwow and catch up and talk. So, this is going to kind of be our go between episode in between having some guests. And as we've told our listeners before, we're going to go back and forth between Don and I just talking about turning grief into growth and then hearing that from some of our guests as well. So, today's episode is going to be centered around, I'm going to use the term loss, definitely grief. I think that in our minds, sometimes we just think of grief as the death of a loved one, and it definitely absolutely is. But there's other types of grief that are non-death related. So that's kind of what we've decided to kind of talk about and circle the wagons on this morning. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of read a definition, Don, that I found on Google. I found it interesting. It says grief is best defined as the complex, natural, and deeply personal response to significant loss, involving intense emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual reactions like sadness, anger, and confusion as individuals adapt to the absence of someone or something important with no set timeline or predictable path. It's more than just sadness, encompassing a wide range of feelings and changes as one processes a new reality, whether from death, relationship breakdown, job loss, or illness. So that's what we're going to focus on, is kind of the last part of that. Regardless of the situation, there's a lot of people out there that might be grieving, but they're afraid to talk about it because maybe they know somebody who lost a spouse or lost a child, and they don't want to feel ostracized or alienated and say, "You're not grieving. You just might be heartbroken." But there's a difference. And I don't know in their mind's eye if there is a difference. I've always said that your trauma is your trauma and kind of what you're going through. So, what do you think of that definition, Don, before we move on?
Well, what an understatement. Loss is more than just sadness. Um, Grief is more than just sadness. I mean, that's yeah, there's so many emotions that we deal with when we have grief in our life at that time. Um, I think it's, a good overall good definition, but it's complex, and I feel like loss. is something that we deal with almost daily. We don't, some of that loss that we deal with is not a big deal, but some of it is. And just like, the definition says. So, yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, I think this is just a hypothesis, an example I came up with, but I think if I carried an 1895 Morgan silver dollar around in my pocket, and one day I was at the grocery store, and it's always with me, and I reached in my pocket and felt my keys, but didn't feel my Morgan silver dollar, and I thought, oh no, I've lost my Morgan silver dollar, then that would evoke sadness. And it is a loss, but it's not quantified to the point of what we're talking about with this. So there is a loss aspect in life that you can go with where you lose something and maybe you find it again. Maybe it's your car keys that you lost and then you find them again or something like that. But what we're talking about is more complex. It's something that I like this encompassing a wide range of feelings and changes as one processes a new reality. No predictable path. We've talked, you and I, just about um, our journey, and we've talked about just even using the word path with that in substitution of that word. And it's hard when you don't see a straight, predictable path and it veers to the right and the left, up and down, and you just don't know what you don't know. So what we're going to do is I used AI. I think it was ChatGPT, and I just kind of said, "Tell me some different types of grief or loss." And I thought this was really comprehensive. So we've got a list here that we're going to kind of go down and just kind of read some of the headings. And Don and I are going to take some time to kind of pause and reflect. And if we have some comments on them, we will. If we don't, we'll move on to the next. So the first one is divorce or breakup. So, Don, what do you
Hmm.
think about that?
Well, having personal experience with divorce, I do know that that is a real heavy grief. When I got married, when I said my vows, I meant them, and I had every intention of being married to this person for the rest of my life. Um, and uh, for 18 years, we were a married couple, and then we were divorced. And it's challenging in a lot more ways than grief of somebody that died. Uh, this person's still alive, and we've both had made choices, and the choices were that we weren't going to continue this union of love. So the the challenge of dealing with those complex emotions where I'm making a choice to really screw up, my life, her life, and my children's life. And I felt like that was what I was making a choice about. I truly
Mm,
believed I was going to screw everything up, but I had to do it. And I felt like I took a leap of faith. Um, but the sadness of it all, and I can remember crying um, for days on end about how my life turned to crap because of this choice that I've made. Um, and uh, there was I didn't well there were people that I could talk to, thank God. If it weren't for them and giving me their sharing their wisdom with me, I doubt that I would have been able to get through it. I had a, a counselor, a marriage counselor that I was going to, and she said to me, why are you coming here without your wife? I said, well, my wife doesn't want to come. Um, and I feel like I'm in this relationship that I don't know how to get out of. And so she helped me, this counselor helped me, guided me, my good friends helped and guided me. Um, and my children were pretty upset with me, and that was hard. But eventually, we reconciled, and in all honesty, eventually my ex-wife and I were able to at least talk to each other and be in the same room together without, having emotional uh, struggles. So
Yeah,
it was hard.
I like how you called out the difference of it was a choice you made. When you look at grief of loss of a loved one, it's very rarely ever a choice that the surviving person gets to make, unless you were best friends with Jack Kevorkian back in the 80s and, you were on the euthanasia bandwagon, then it's usually something that you don't have any say in the matter. I kind of felt that way with the divorce as well. So my story is the receiving end of that. My parents got divorced when I was 10 months old. I went my whole life thinking that I was the cause of the divorce because my brother was, 3 years old. I was, 10 months old, and my parents decided to get divorced. Well, it had to have been because of me, right? So I think I was 35 years old. I was raised by my mom. Dad had visitation. Didn't see him much past 18. There was this whole aspect. I wrote him a letter and I was like, hey, I feel like I was the whole cause of the divorce. Was I? And I remember him, talking with me. He's like, no, it had nothing to do with you. So I think there's this whole aspect of that's very complex in the grief and the loss because of the parties involved and decisions you have to make to get out of a caustic relationship or one that's detrimental, and it having trickle down effect type thing. So I think a lot of our listeners are probably relatable with that, considering the divorce rate's like 50%. So yeah.
Yeah, it's hard, and I'm glad you brought up the different view from a child's point of view, and that was probably uh, my children were the reason that we stayed together for as long as we did.
Yeah.
Um, if they hadn't been there, I'm sure we would have broken up long before. But we were, I was concerned about the damage that might be done, and I made sure I did my best, and I think the message was clear and got across that they had nothing to do with this, and I wanted to make sure of that they knew that. Um, so,
Like anything,
but
communication's key, right?
yeah,
And not expressing an element of flippancy to
yeah,
it, and that it's a hard decision.
yeah. How about loss of a job or career?
I tell you, this one strikes home for me. I lost my son David in an auto accident in 2020. And 3 years later, I had been with the company for 13 years, and I received a phone call. Mind you, I had just gotten promoted to assistant vice president of this Fortune 500 company the month before. And my boss basically said, hey, you're being laid off. I thought he was joking. I didn't, understand the severity of it at the time. And then I just went in this rabbit hole and I couldn't believe it. I ended up seeking out a therapist and going through, I think it was like 7 sessions of counseling. And I'm like, what is going on with me? He said, well, you're experiencing a different type of loss and grief, and you're grieving all over again. Your son died instantly in an auto accident. You just lost your job suddenly. And it's sending you down a different path of similarity of loss. And I had never equated the two together because there's no way a job loss can be the same equated to the loss of a child. But I had to work through that. Ironically, some of the ways I worked through it was, taking my logoed shirts for that company and going out in the garden and setting them on fire. It was very therapeutic for me. I recorded the whole thing. I had a song playing in the background. It was King and Country, a Christian group, burned the ships, talking about how they burned the ships when they came. I think it was even South America, whatever. And they didn't look back. You know, they didn't have an exit strategy. And I just thought, man, I'm moving forward. I'm looking forward. That happened. So I'm going to burn, my shirt. I'm going to go ahead and say that was a different chapter of my life, and I'm moving forward. That sounds very tidied up and simple, but it probably took me 6 to 12 months of working through bitterness and hatred towards that past company and the people that let me go that I thought were friends. So yeah, it was a major loss and grief for me.
Yeah, it sounds similar to what I experienced as well. But for me, it was the writing was kind of on the wall. Uh, 2 years prior to Joshua's death, um, I was my the position at this. I worked for a food service management company called Sodexo. It's well known throughout the world. Uh, a very large company. Aramark is, a competitor, and there's all different others as well. But Sodexo, I'd worked with them for 10 years at this point in time. And the position that I was at this account, the current account, the account was looking to cut costs in any way they could, and they decided that my position was no longer necessary. So Sodexo kept me on and said, find a job, but we're going to work you. We'll float you and have you work in different places. So I did that for 2 years, and I I was looking. I was 50 some odd years old. I guess maybe I was even 50 years old, and the positions that I was trying to get, um, I just was having a tough time with them. And I think there were younger people that had as many, qualities and had the experience that I had. So if I were them, I would have chosen to go with the younger person as well, if it's even all the way.
Sure, it's a real challenge.
So anyway, 6 months after Josh died, so I was floating for two and a half years. Um, I get a message from our district manager, and he says, "Your your last day is going to be Friday, and we're going to pay you a severance package. Um, we carried you as long as we could. Um, you've tried to find work. It's not like you haven't tried. So we're just going to let you go." And at the time, I'm like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
how much more can I take? And but looking back, uh, in the rearview mirror, I see where that was such a blessing,
Hmm.
and it kind of opened the doors to so many other things, and taps being one of them. I just embraced the the organization. In fact, it was I was let go like a week or 2 weeks before um, this big event that I was going to for the first time at the suicide loss seminar. And it when I went there, I was like, okay, I don't have to take off from work. It's like I didn't have to figure that piece out. And and I went back to school. I studied. I got some more education. And like I said, TAPS was there for me to pick up the pieces. So pick me up off the floor.
One of these days when I grow up to be a big boy, I want to be an educated fellow like you. But until then,
Yeah,
I would say for
that's not something that most people would describe me as educated. I might be wise, but
there you
you
go.
know, a wise acre
Wise ass
is
is different
yeah,
than
wise
yeah.
ass is different than
I would say that, just for our listeners, not everybody is going to be able to say in a loss like we experienced, like, man, it turned out to be one of the best things in the world that happened to me. I can say that. Don can say that. I felt like I was in the middle of an ocean clinging to a buoy tightly. And then I was cut loose and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I could swim across the English Channel or whatever. And I didn't know that I didn't trust or believe in my abilities. I didn't trust that there was something else out there for me. And I really got apathetic and stagnant where I was at. So I really do feel like it was a great thing for me. It sounds like it was for you as well. But we also understand for our listeners that might not always be the case. You might
that.
not always land on your feet. And to that, I would just encourage you keep pushing on, keep persevering with that.
And I would also add to that, be open to other opportunities. Don't, you know, it's real easy to have this tunnel vision,
Yeah.
that this is all I know how to do. And truly, I was in the food service business for 30 some odd years, and I thought, how can any of what I know in that business be transferred into another line of work?
Yep.
I didn't see it at all. Um, and I didn't have the energy to do the food service work again,
Yeah.
or more of it.
Yeah.
So it just I would advise people to just be open, keep your eyes open, keep your heart open to other opportunities.
The growth for me, because we always want to bring this podcast to the growth aspect of turning grief into growth, was the start and the catalyst of it was burning my shirts. That's where I was able to say, okay, I didn't have any control. I didn't have any say over the severance of my job, but I do have control and say over my destiny and my future. So therefore, I'm going to burn this part of the past and I'm going to set afresh a new seed in the ground for the future.
I'm glad you brought that up again, because when you said that the first time, I was like, oh my God, what a great idea, and what a great way to deal with that. And I forgot to mention that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Now we're going to have people posting all over Facebook burning of shirts from the past. And I said, well, Greg said he did it. I think I actually did post that, hoping that I didn't befriend any past people, employers. All right, the next category, boy, this is a sticky wicket because we see a lot of this in society. Loss of health or diagnosis of chronic illness. I want to say I just recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine. He is also a listener of this podcast, who was going through the loss of his daughter-in-law due to cancer, and unfortunately, she just passed away last week. We talked about the long goodbye leading up to and the year or two of treatment and the no hope from the doctors, hospice called in, and things like that. So there can be an aspect of loss and grief that is not sudden. So far we've talked about divorce and breakup. There's a finality to that, but there's also a matter of leading up to, as far as decisions that are made and things. We've talked about the loss of a job or career, and a lot of that, if we don't have a choice, it's totally just out of the clear blue. Hey, we're letting you go today. But when you're talking about loss of health or diagnosis of a chronic illness, there's this whole aspect of, am I going to be, fatherless? Am I going to be, a widow or a widower? What is this going to look like? And we see a lot of that with Alzheimer's as well. When I mentioned the long goodbye, where my wife's grandpa had Alzheimer's, and her grandma, who just recently passed away a week and a half ago at 102 years old, She had to witness and watch her husband with Alzheimer's for the last several years of his life, not know who she was and things like that. So there's a lot of grief and loss that comes from that as well.
And yeah, mentioning Alzheimer's, dementia, the the loss comes before they actually die. So my wife and I experienced her mom at the age of 90, I believe she was, started to lose her memory and her ability to communicate with us. And it was a profound loss because my wife would talk to her mom like every day. And the two of them, would have phone conversations uh, on such a regular basis, and they were really tight. And then, all of a sudden, um, she's still there, but she's not able to communicate with Carol.
Yeah.
And that was super hard. Uh, for her, and so she felt like she was grieving at that time, and then 7 years later her mom died, and then there's more grief, grief on top of
Yeah.
grief. Her sister, similar situation, uh, dementia, and um, she died much quicker than my mother-in-law. um, but that was the same thing. And then I have to go into 6 months after my sister-in-law died, our brother-in-law, her husband, uh, died while sitting by the edge of a pond with his fishing rod
Mm.
in the pond, and he just died. He loved fishing. So
That's how I want to go, Don.
here's somebody
Peaceful.
who died at, in his sleep. I guess I don't believe he experienced any pain, but he was doing something that he loved, and I believe he died of a broken heart. Um, that the love was so great that that's
You
what
know,
took him.
one of my favorite all-time movies, I even named my golden retriever dog after this line in this movie, is Secondhand Lions. It's got Haley Joel Osment, Robert Duvall. Um, oh, I just lost my train of thought on the other gentleman. But anyway, incredible movie. I think it was a Disney movie. But one of the favorite quotes that I have from that movie is he went out with his boots on. And I would love to be able to say I went out with my boots on, and that doesn't have to be the method in which I went out as much as I squeezed the pulp out of life. I've commonly had conversations with dads, for example, who have lost children, and I have heard this back and forth, and I've engaged in this as well, where it's like, well, it must have been nice to be able to say goodbye to your loved one, and that's somebody that have been dealing with an illness or a sickness, and maybe they passed away, and they were able to be there at their bedside and say goodbye because I wasn't able to in a tragic auto accident, and I would say that it's not any easier. Either one. I've listened to tons of these conversations, and as I've always said, you can't play the comparison game with that. Don, just for the sake of time, there's no way we're going to get through this whole
Yeah.
list. I'm going
Uh,
to go ahead and just kind of read through, if that's okay.
yeah.
Um,
Let's, yeah, let's do that.
so, infertility or pregnancy loss was another one. Loss of a friendship, empty nest, and I just want to just pause real quick. When my third child, my final youngest, left the house and went to college, I cried like I've never cried before at that point. This is before my son died. I think I cried for a 2 hour drive back home from dropping her off. And not only was it my daughter, because I didn't cry a lick when I dropped my sons off at college. It's a different type of relationship. But I do think that there's this whole severance aspect of, empty nest that a lot of people enter into. And with that, I just want to encourage parents, especially, to make sure that you are investing in each other's lives beyond just the sporting events and the children. Make sure that you make that wife feel like a queen and that husband feel like a king. Go on dates with them aside from the kids so that whenever you do become empty nesters, it's not this deer in the headlights looking at each other across from each other at the dinner table and experiencing this loss because every conversation has been about the kids up to that point. Because we see a lot of divorce in America with the empty nest syndrome. Retirement, I've seen that a lot as well with people that basically they just kind of go through this loss of
It,
activities,
it,
discipline.
a loss of identity.
Yes.
Because oftentimes when we have a career, 30, 40, 50 years, that's who we are. And then we're no longer that.
Yep.
Um, so,
Yeah,
uh,
and I'm just going to kind of bring it to a close with this last one, loss of independence. That really, you see that a lot with people that get injured. I had to put my mom into a nursing home, and I would see other younger people in there that I thought, why are they in here? And then I'd have to remind myself, hey, this is a rehabilitation center as well. It's not just a nursing home. So there's people that basically broke their legs or were in auto accidents or, you know, whatever type of illness where they lose their independence. They have to have somebody help them go to the restroom to get dressed in the morning. So there's a lot of loss that could be experienced just from being a strong, independent person all your life, and all of a sudden you're dependent on somebody else.
yeah, I have a cousin who is struggling with that. He's got all of his faculties together, but he's not able to take care of himself completely. You know, so it's really hard. Um, no question.
I lied
Uh,
when I said I wanted to close with that. I do want to mention loss of faith or belief system. And here's why I want to mention this. Um, there are ancillary aspects of grief that we experience. It's this I have to take this pharmaceutical medicine because the other one that I'm taking causes this symptom. So I have to take this to offset that. That's the only way I really know to explain it. That in grief, you can have these offshoot griefs and things that you're dealing with that might not have anything necessarily to do with your direct loss. For me, it was a crisis of faith. I was a firm believer in God up until my son died, and then I really started struggling in my belief system after that. So, I guess I would just say don't be blindsided and shocked and thinking, what is wrong with me with any of these things? They're very par for the course. They're very much what a lot of people go through when they experience loss, and they kind of have to refine themselves a lot of times.
yeah, I want to touch on too, loss of a dream or future. Um, you know, drug addiction can really throw that into for both the person that's struggling with the addiction as well as the family. That if it's a child, the parents are thinking that this life is now the future is
Yeah,
not going to happen. They envisioned having their child go to college, whatever. Um, but now it's just not happening. Um, and I've experienced that too. And with that, I feel like connection is so important. Getting connected with other people that understand that understand, what that feels like, and that have gotten support and help
yeah.
around that because you do become stronger based on that.
I think that's a great call out. Like Al Anon, for example, is a great
Yes,
group for support for
absolutely.
parents who are going through addictions. And yeah, it can be a heavy load. You and I both gone through that with children. And you can almost have your future, your legacy, your heritage taken away from you if you let it. And it's a very demoralizing outlook on the future in many ways.
Yeah. Anticipatory grief. You have um, someone in your family is on hospice,
Yeah.
right? That they're still with us, but they're going to go, and that's a pretty big one. Again, just get support around it, uh, and just know that you're not alone, and that there are people that care and want to help you through that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with that anticipatory, I was referencing my friend earlier who just lost his daughter-in-law last week. And, this whole aspect of our conversation ahead of time, like what can I do for my son? What can I do in this situation? And the only advice I can give him is the gift of presence. It's just being there. You don't necessarily have to have the right words. But then if it does happen and you do have that loss, you just have to continue putting the work in and putting yourself in a position of being around others that have walked this path before and can walk alongside you. So, well, Don, I feel like this was a really good episode to really kind of call out some of those other types of loss and grief that are non-death related. So, any final words that you have?
Uh, just that I am a firm believer that my life has benefited from the grief that I've experienced. And I know that sounds kind of backwards. Uh, I believe me, the things that uh, like losing a child, losing my parents, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of pain and suffering that went with that. But when I think about how my heart opened up and how I was able to learn through my grief, and that's what, the turning grief into growth is all about. That I've I become a better person because of my grief experiences. And I feel like I am a better version of myself. And I want to continue to do that, hopefully with less grief involved. But that put me on that path, right, to learning. So I feel like once we get on a healing path with grief, that there's no stopping us, that we can continue to learn and grow through whatever life throws at us.
I couldn't agree more. I feel the exact same way. I'm way less down the road than you are as far as years in my grief path and journey. But I would say that I remember hearing people make that comment that you did in years one and two. And I thought, there's no way that I will ever be a better person. There's no way that I can turn this grief into growth. And I think that's what this podcast is all about, is for Don and I, as two men that have walked this journey of hard grief, to be able to say, one, you don't have to grieve all the time. You can be in active grieving. Two, you can help others on this path. Life is not meant to be lonely. And three, we would like to just keep presenting a little piece of hope and a little bit of peace in your life to let you know, if you continue to put the work in, if you continue to address your emotions, that you will see growth in your life if you allow it. So, thank you so much for dialing in and listening to this episode. And until next time. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen. We hope turning grief into growth spoke to your heart and becomes a part of your own journey of healing and transformation. If you know someone who could use a little hope, Please share this episode with them. And don't forget to follow, like, or subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss what's coming next. Don and I can't wait to share more conversations to help you keep turning your grief into growth. Until next time.